Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 29-year personal injury lawyer. And this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And up this week, we are talking about the situation that has come out of Houston, Texas, where a man shot an 11-year-old boy and killed him after the boy and some of his friends pulled the old prank of ding dong ditch. So just imagine a harmless prank that you very well may have pulled as a kid, ringing a doorbell and running away. And it ends with an 11-year-old boy shot in the back. So, how did we get from silly mischief, a very tragic situation? And what does the law say about this type of a situation? We're going to break it down today. We're going to take a look at criminal versus civil law, how they interrelate in something like this. We're going to talk about Missouri law, even though this happened in Texas, and just take a moment to reflect on something that clearly could have been avoided and never happened in the first place. So again, let's just start with the basics. A group of kids rang a doorbell and they ran. One child didn't make it home and he was shot in the back as he was running away by the homeowner. The police made an arrest and the suspect has appeared in court. And according to some local authorities that have weighed in on this situation, for example, Kansas City Overland Park Police spokesman John Lacey had this advice: don't meet kids with violence. Use your doorbell camera, call the parents, or call the police if needed, but de escalate a situation. There's simply no reason to immediately pull a gun, and especially if someone is not breaking into your home, to start firing outside of your home if they're not presenting an imminent threat of great bodily harm or death to you. And then another local expert, parenting expert, Tracy Foster, she's the co founder of Screen Sanity. She points to social media as being an influence on these kids. She says that kids copy what they see online, and parents should think about possibly delaying social media exposure, giving responsibility gradually, and using tools that help flag risky behavior so parents can start having conversations early. And the idea is trying to avoid your kids being influenced to do something that might be a risky behavior that could lead to a tragic unintended consequence. Right here in Kansas City, we've seen echoes of this before. Within the last couple of years, you might recall Ralph Yarl, the 16-year-old boy who rang the wrong doorbell. He pulled up to the wrong house. He was picking up one of his siblings, went up to the door. He rang the doorbell, and the homeowner shot him through the door. No questions asked. And Ralph survived and has, I think, made a very remarkable recovery. But that situation led to both criminal and or criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. And here in that particular case, the man who shot Ralph, Andrew Lester, who was an 84-year-old man, shot him through his glass door. He hit him in the head and his arm. But again, Jarl survived. He was charged with first degree assault and armed criminal action. He pleaded not guilty and he claimed self defense under Missouri's Castle Doctrine, but he eventually pled guilty to second degree assault. We'll talk a little bit more about the Castle Doctrine and what exactly that looks like for a homeowner protecting their home, their life, their property. On the civil side of things, which of course is where I work and my realm of general law practice, a lawsuit was filed not by my law firm. Another law firm filed a lawsuit for damages in 2024 against Andrew Lester, seeking accountability beyond the criminal system. And again, I've talked about this before. A lot of these situations, there's both a criminal aspect and a civil aspect. There's different standards involved because in the criminal world, the government is seeking to take away life, liberty, property. In the civil world, it's seeking monetary damages. So there's different burdens of proof. Criminal, as you probably know, is beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil side of things, the person making the claim for damage has to prove their case by a preponderance of the evidence. So they just have to tip the scale ever so slightly in their favor to win at trial. In this civil lawsuit that was filed on behalf of minor Ralph Yarl, the attorneys there highlighted that deadly force against an unarmed teenager ringing a doorbell was unreasonable under Missouri law. Now, again, just talking about the difference between criminal and civil, the criminal cases are the ones that we see in headlines. Prosecutors decide what charges to file, like assault or murder for something like this, and self-defense laws are tested in court. And again, situations like this are usually headline news because they are tragic, they are severe, and the whole situation's pretty outrageous, to be just real blunt about it. In Texas, just like it is here in Missouri, the Castle Doctrine means you don't have to retreat in certain circumstances, but it's not a blank check. You cannot just haul off and shoot somebody on your property because they're on your property. And again, in the civil world, they're a whole different track because even if there's a criminal trial and the state is prosecuting a person, families can also file, for example, a wrongful death claim like they will probably be doing here in this Texas case. In Texas, wrongful death covers deaths caused by someone's wrongful act, neglect, or carelessness. And think of it this way. The criminal court asks, did this person commit a crime? The civil court asks, should this family be compensated for their loss? And that's exactly the difference between the two avenues of the legal system. So, what might a lawsuit look like? Again, I'm always going to be focused in on Missouri law when analyzing something like this, because obviously I'm not a Texas lawyer and I don't know all the ins and outs of a Texas wrongful death claim. But the family could bring a wrongful death case or claims for assault and battery. They might even argue negligence, that responding with a gun to a prank could be seen as an unreasonable choice. On the defense side, the homeowner may argue self-defense, but civil courts still ask, was the response reasonable and proportionate? Based on what the homeowner was faced with, was it reasonable for that individual to start shooting at these kids? Deadly force to protect property alone is very limited under Texas law. And the central question for a jury is usually, was deadly force really necessary here? And again, very similar in Missouri as well. Now, in a wrongful death type case like this, as far as what damages a jury might award, if the jury says yes to the question of, was this an unreasonable use of force, then the family can recover damages. Again, in Missouri, things like the funeral cost, any medical expenses that were attendant to the death, and then loss of companionship, loss of guidance, whatever that looks like in the particular situation. Those are the elements that can be claimed in a wrongful death action. Now, again, punitive damages could be on the table. Remember, those are the types of damages that are there to punish the defendant because the actions of the defendant were so reckless. It showed a conscious disregard for the welfare of others. It rises to almost the level of willfulness. If that's the case, and that can be proven, a jury can be presented with the option to award punitive damages, which again, they're punitive. They're meant to punish. They're meant to punish the defendant, and they're also meant to deter future conduct like this to make the community safer. And you got to remember, again, in a civil action like this, the burden of proof is lighter than in a criminal case. So they do not have to prove to bring this civil claim that it's beyond a reasonable doubt, but that it's just more likely than not that the defendant's actions caused the death. So, what about insurance? So, where does money come from in something like this? If you're going to make a claim against somebody for a situation like this, and you're trying to get somebody compensated, where does the money come from? As I've discussed before, you can never rely on the fact that an individual might have sufficient money, assets to satisfy any judgment that comes along from a jury verdict. So the way it works is a jury will decide what, if anything, the person making the claim is going to get as compensation. Once that happens, a judge enters a judgment for that amount. And then after that, a person, again, the person that made the claim, they can begin the process of trying to collect it. So if for some reason the person does have assets, and whether, for example, maybe they own their own home, they don't have any loan on it, maybe they own vehicles, maybe they have money in the bank account, things like that would be avenues for recovery. Now, the problem is a couple things. In Missouri, for example, whatever you own jointly with a spouse is not subject to collection on a judgment. So if you own your house with your spouse, if you own your cars, if you had jointly owned bank accounts, all of that's safe from this judgment. The other thing is, if for some reason that's not the situation, a person could file for bankruptcy and discharge that judgment in the bankruptcy. And then there's nothing. So, in reality, where does money come from? Money comes from insurance. And so, this is where it could get really muddy about whether or not there's actually going to be insurance money available because homeowners insurance usually excludes intentional acts like shootings. So, depending on how all the facts break down, it may or may not be something that the homeowner's insurance is going to cover. If for some reason, if the homeowner ends up testifying, which probably won't happen if they're facing criminal penalties, but if it can be shown that it was a negligent situation as opposed to an intentional situation, then you might have insurance coverage. But let's face it, when somebody's shooting at somebody, it's usually intentional. And it's going to be very hard to get an insurance policy to cover the damages that are being claimed in any civil legal action that follows. Some policies have carve outs for self defense, but it's going to be a fight. And that means families may end up battling both the shooter and the insurance company at the same time, trying to get some kind of compensation out of a situation like this. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And just as another sort of side example, we've represented people that have been hurt in hunting accidents. And again, that's a purely negligent situation where maybe friends are out hunting, somebody mistakes a person for an animal and they shoot and they injure a person. And at that point, a homeowner's policy will cover that situation because again, it was negligent. They did not intentionally mean to shoot the person. Situations like we've been talking about, where people, for whatever reason, believe they're defending themselves or their home or whatever it is that's going through their minds, they are intentionally shooting at the person. So it's going to be a very difficult situation to get covered by homeowners insurance. So, what's the takeaway from these situations that, again, are so completely avoidable? Both of these, the one out of Texas here this week, the one we had in the Kansas City area within the last couple of years, the advice is simple: don't escalate a situation. Do what you can to figure out who's at your door. People are going to ring your doorbell. It doesn't mean they're there to do you harm. As you know, if you live in the city, we get rings on our doorbell all the time. Sometimes it's solicitors and we don't want them there, but guess what? We can't shoot them. And sometimes it is kids being silly, something like that. Maybe it is somebody that's got the wrong address. You don't know. But again, use your cameras, use your common sense, take a breath, and don't have your first instinct is grab your gun and get to the door to start shooting. But the other thing is, on the other side, it's a good time for parents to talk to kids about the dangers of our world today and what maybe used to be harmless pranks. Nobody really thought a lot about it. Now, sometimes those things turn deadly. And again, for the example here in our local area with Ralph Yarl, again, that's just a situation that has no explanation. This poor kid just showed up at this house, the wrong house. And for whatever reason, this homeowner decided shooting was what he was going to do. But remember what Tracy Foster's advice is for parents. It's gold. Delay social media if you can. Of course, there are so many other reasons to delay social media exposure, but this is just another one. Give kids responsibility in stages and talk about what they're seeing online. Don't get suckered in to stupid online trends. And we know they run the spectrum, and that a lot of them can be very dangerous for kids. And have a family rule. If friends suggest a prank, we leave. We don't participate. And for homeowners, keep in mind, if I get pranked, I record, I report, I cool down, I don't escalate it. I call the police. Let the police handle it. That's the easiest, simplest solution. There's no reason to take a gun into your hand when your life is not being threatened, or you're not being threatened with great bodily harm, because the consequences are severe, they're real, and they lead to a lot of problems on all sides. So also remember this about the castle doctrine. It doesn't mean you can shoot anyone on your property. Okay. Again, whether it's Missouri, Texas, where this situation occurred, proportionality matters. And if someone is running away from your house, that weighs heavily against any self defense claim that you could possibly make, especially if it's an 11-year-old kid. Courts scrutinize these types of cases closely, and you cannot just rely on, I felt like I was under attack, my house was under attack, something like that. It's not going to fly. And you're going to find yourself having created a really horrific situation. You're going to face a lot of legal consequences, and there's going to be somebody on the other end of that is going to suffer dramatically in their lives. So, if for any reason you ever find yourself in some shooting situation, again, we have seen them, hunting accidents, things like that. But whatever that looks like, and you think somebody else is responsible and you think you might have a claim there, feel free. You can always reach out. Like I say, it's always a free call. We're happy to take a look, investigate, see what the situation looks like, and see how we can help. And until the next episode, stay safe, stay well.